Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode. Today I want to talk about a question that came up on the question and answer social media website known as Quora. Quora is a great platform to get involved in. I definitely recommend you check it out. They provide an opportunity for people to ask questions and then for knowledgeable people within that field to answer them. So a question came up from a user: how can I prevent my app from being hacked by hackers? That's a good question. We hear about different websites getting hacked, servers getting hacked, applications with security vulnerabilities, and you always hear about different platforms needing to update their code to deal with security patches. Platforms like Windows operating system, even the Mac operating system, and unfortunately even Linux has been shown to have some vulnerabilities, even though it's still considered to be the one of the most secure systems. So the short answer to why these services get hacked is because they're designed in a way with the hardware and software that's imperfect. It's not, the code that's created for these platforms is written by coders and by teams. And as good as the coders may be, and let me tell you, some of these platforms have some really talented coders. People make mistakes. There is the potential for a vulnerability to end up in one line of code that is part of a platform that may have millions of lines of code. So that's why you find that websites and services get hacked. It could be a very small issue within the code itself. And what happens is malicious hackers will test out these services and platforms to try to find any vulnerabilities that may exist. Obviously, the developers as well, they'll test their programs as well. And over time, they may identify, some of the security issues, and address it before, the vulnerability is known in the wild. So, some of the techniques that hackers use, there's a bunch of them, and I'm not going to be able to describe them all, but there's phishing campaigns, which are like email attacks, where you'll receive an email in your email box, and there may be attachment or a link to an external site that may have some executable code that can infect your operating system or your computer. From there, then it can, if you have access to a server, let's say you have FTP access or SFTP access, they can pretty much follow you as you navigate the web. They can, if they install a keylogger onto your system, it's the potential for them to track every single thing you do online. And so that's one way that people get hacked and targeted. Another way is social engineering. You hear it often that somebody will contact the telephone company pretending to be you and give some information that's accurate, and somehow they'll gain access to your account information, or maybe they're able to transfer some information so that they can control it. So with social engineering attacks, we got to really be careful with that. Hopefully the telecommunication companies will ensure that their representatives will follow proper security protocols to identify the individual that's calling in. And social engineering attacks can happen with people, developing, friendships with others online. I mean, if you go to Facebook and you have like 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 friends, do you really have 5,000 friends? How well do you know these people? Over time, it's possible, over the course of a couple of weeks, a couple of months, even, a year, that somebody is maliciously trying to develop a relationship with you that you may not be aware of. And then through that, malicious attempt, they can then gain your trust. And by gaining your trust, they may gain some, the ability to get you to do things that you normally would not do. And that's part of social engineering. That's a very quick, example of that. Another one is like brute force attacks. A brute force attack is when, for example, if I have, my website, right? So when a person tries to log into your site without knowing the username and password, they may have a computer program that is working off of a dictionary attack or a rainbow table, and they are pretty much, the program is cycling through every single possible variation of usernames and passwords. So that's known as a brute force attack. And eventually, if you're using a simple password, eventually that program will crack into your system. That's why I always advise people, to use different username and passwords combinations for every single service and website that they have online. This can get difficult, and that's why I recommend using a password manager. Password managers help you to create, really difficult, unique passwords that are not reused on various other services. So that way you become less of a victim, less of a potential victim to brute force attacks. So when a brute force attack happens, if the password is less than 8 characters, and if it's like a dictionary term that can be, a word that can be found in a dictionary, that increases the likelihood of you getting hacked. Now, if your password is north of, 20 characters, maybe even 30, 40, or 50 characters, and multi-character password doesn't include a word that's found in a dictionary, now you significantly decrease the potential for your website to be, or your account to be hacked via brute force attack. That's one way to protect your stuff online, using a password manager and using very unique usernames and passwords. Another thing to remember is that some services offer two-factor authentication. Now that is helpful because if somebody does gain access to your username and password, at least the two-factor will, if they don't have access to your two-factor authentication device or service, then they won't be able to gain access to your website. So that's one thing. Then there's other things like buffer overflow and SQL injection, where they can, gain access to your database, to the database of a website or application or service. There's cross-site scripting. There's network profiling to find vulnerabilities where, a hacker will, just maybe drive around and they'll scan a network to see if there's any vulnerabilities or ways to get into the network, and then from there they can potentially monitor all traffic going through that network and capture the data and save that data for later use. So that's why it's important for you to protect your network, and the way you do that is, if for your basic home use, protect your router. Change your default credentials on the router. That's extremely important. Also, enable WPA2, which is a stronger level of encryption for the router, and also disable WPS. WPS shouldn't be enabled. And then when you have guests over, you shouldn't give them your main password to your router. You should set up a guest account, so that way they can just get limited access to your internet, but not with the master password. They'll have a separate easier way to access the internet. And then some other ways are, sometimes hackers will do USB drops, where they'll put a piece of malware on a USB and they'll then maybe drop it, in an area potentially where you might pick it up. On that USB, there'll be the malware. When you insert it into your computer, the malware will then potentially install a keylogger or some other virus or way to communicate with the hacker, and that is another way for them to gain access to your stuff. That's why unknown USBs or unknown devices, you should never insert into your computer. You got to really protect your system as much as possible, and one way to do that is just don't install unknown devices into your system. Then there's some stuff like zero-day vulnerabilities. These are issues that are in code that people may not be aware of, except for maybe one hacker or, group of hackers. So zero-day vulnerabilities are just that. They're vulnerabilities that have not been identified. They may not be known by, antivirus programs or anti-malware programs, and that vulnerability can be exploited, to gain access to your system. For instance, if there's you know, a defect in the code of an operating system that allows a hacker to bypass the login, screen, that would be a vulnerability that is dangerous. So there's a lot of zero-day vulnerabilities out there, and again, it's because code is imperfect. Developers are always working to improve their code, but unfortunately, sometimes there may be glitches in the code or issues that may not be fully aware, and somebody might have figured that out. So, you want to be mindful that sometimes these are things you may not have as much control over. And then this is another topic. There's the fake wireless access points. When you go, to use public Wi-Fi. Let's say you're visiting a local establishment that advertises free Wi-Fi. It's not uncommon for somebody to create a duplicate Wi-Fi access point with a similar naming convention to that location. If they then decide to, DDoS that primary Wi-Fi of the location, now their access point that looks similar to theirs would be the one that you would most likely, use. Then they would do what's called a man-in-the-middle attack, where, since you're using, well, not really a man-in-the-middle attack in this case, but, can be also. Since you're using their Wi-Fi connection, they can gather all the information and data that's being transferred online. So if you're logging into your accounts, if you're doing things like FTPing into a website or things of that nature, they can gather all that information. So you got to be very mindful of that. One way to protect yourself from that is just don't use public Wi-Fi. Just always use your data connection, to make sure that you know the network that you're accessing the internet and your services from. This is extremely important, and I just recommend it as a basis, for our security. Beyond that, you could also use a VPN, which is a virtual private network, which helps to encrypt, further the data, that you're transmitting and using, when you visit a website. So definitely check out VPNs and don't access, free public Wi-Fi or unknown networks. If you don't know the network, don't use it. Nothing is really for free. There's always a cost, and sometimes that cost can be greater, than your data usage on your phone. Then there's, I remember watching the movie Firewall. Firewall is a movie that came out, quite a number of years ago, and there was an IT specialist that was in charge of the security of a bank, and some hackers wanted to, gain access to the network so they can transfer money. Now they couldn't really hack the system, so what they did was old-fashioned tactics. They kidnapped the family and held them hostage until the IT person, gave them direct access to the network. The movie has a somewhat happy ending where, the bad hackers did not, were caught, and the IT specialist, was victorious in, rescuing his family and, protecting the network. So, old-fashioned, tactics have been known to be used, and it's kind of hard to, to defend against that. Like if you have the username and password and somebody, threatens you or someone you love, that's tough, not to give out that information. So, that's another reason why, hacks are so prevalent. I mean, not really prevalent because of that particular reason, but, so possible. Because if you can't brute force your way in, if you can't, find another way in, that old-fashioned tactics, have been used. All right. So what else can you do? There's what are other type of vulnerabilities out there? Supercomputers. Supercomputers are computers that have a significant amount of resources. Their CPU resources, their graphical resources, and the power that they have in terms of actual wattage, enables them to accelerate an attack. So some of these obviously are not used by the general public, but can be used by government entities or by, some universities and stuff like that. So, supercomputers also, can do things and crack encryption faster, than anyone with a standard computer can. So what can you do? So since, the original question from Cora was, how can I prevent my app or website from getting hacked? And since the answer is there really is no 100% way to prevent it, there are ways to minimize your the potential for getting hacked. So what can you do? I mentioned some of this before, but I just want to run down this list of suggestions again. Create strong firewalls. At least as one level of defense. A robust user credentials on your system and your network will ensure that people should only access what they should, and you should be monitoring what the traffic is doing on your network. You should limit the applications used on your server and your website. I mean, let's think about it. So I mentioned that the issue is the code, right? So the code and software might have a vulnerability. So if I have 100 apps on my phone or on my computer or on my server, now that's 100 apps that some of them, at least one of them, might have a vulnerability, or maybe all of them do. So now there's 100 potential vulnerabilities, or threat potentials, that exist. So one answer or suggestion is to eliminate the services or applications that you're not using and do not need, because then you eliminate a potential entry point for an attacker. So just don't, if you're not using an app, if you don't need it, there's a better alternative than, either delete or use something that's better. Another thing you can do is obviously you want to protect your network. As I mentioned, you want to protect your computers. Protecting your computers is stuff like, you want to use antivirus, anti-malware. They're not perfect, but they're better than using nothing. So definitely you want to do that. You want to, create 2 user accounts. You'll have your admin account that you use for administrative purposes, and then you'll have a standard user account that has limited, capabilities, to do things on your system. And that's because if somebody does for some reason get, access to that user account, at least they won't be able to do too much damage to your system. Also, just be mindful of any attachments and emails. If it's coming from an untrusted source, be careful with that. And don't just click on any link you find. Those are the fastest ways, to potentially get hacked. Some websites have what's called drive-by downloads, where you don't even have to click on anything on the website. It just automatically downloads into your system, and it might even have an executable file that'll be set to auto run, where it'll just automatically run on your system once it's downloaded. So that's why you gotta be mindful of the websites you visit, and be mindful of the email links and attachments that you check out. As I mentioned, use a VPN if possible. And if this is obviously not for everyone, but if you have, very, important information that should not get access by anybody, you should try to air gap that system, which means just do not connect it, to the network. Maybe take out the Bluetooth, card that might be inside of it. Take out the Wi-Fi card that might be inside of it. Lock all the USB ports, or set them not to be usable, so that way it can, somebody cannot, put a USB in there that might have some malware. So do things like that. That's called air gapping the system. Obviously, there's ways even to get into those systems, but they're very sophisticated. And unless you are like a CEO of a major major company or a government, target, then I wouldn't really be concerned on that level. A regular person shouldn't be concerned at that level. But, if you do have important information, you should air gap it. And then, on your system, on your network, you should whitelist what devices can actually access the network. So even if a person does gain access, to the, can find your network, if they're not whitelisted, then they cannot use it. So that's a very powerful, security protocol to use. That's something I recommend. It's not 100% foolproof because nothing is, but it definitely does help. And then, just keep everything up to date. One of the biggest issues I find is that people do not update their systems as frequently as they should, whether it's their phones, tablets, computers, servers, applications, things of that nature. If an update comes out, update it. Just do it, because if there's a security issue found, like a zero-day vulnerability, and somebody finds it and they patch it, they're going to release an update. And if you don't install that update, then you're still vulnerable, to the attack. So that's why you should update your systems, every system, that you have. That way, at least you'll be protected of the known issues that are out there. Keep everything up to date. So again, this question originated from Cora, and the question was, how can I prevent my app from being hacked? And since there is no 100% way to prevent your system from getting hacked, you should be mindful of this and just take the proper security protocols, implement the proper security protocols, to secure your system and your overall, online life. Again, quick tips: use a password manager, use two-factor authentication, be mindful of, various security issues that may be, used in recent days, recently. Stay up to date with some security blogs, and just keep everything, on your system updated. So when you hear about these attacks on companies like Sony or the DNC or, other, entities that you would think should not be able to be hacked, just realize everything is hackable. It's just your job to make it so difficult that you're no longer a target, that the hackers will move on elsewhere. So, all right, so that's the end of this very long episode. Just wanted to talk about this issue about, how to protect systems from getting hacked, and, why, why it's virtually impossible to create a hack-proof system, but how you can create a very secure system. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe, because I'll be, giving some more tidbits of information on how to manage your website, do things like secure your website from attacks, and also on how to create websites. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.